my name is Stevie Vargas. I'm the Upstate Campaign Coordinator with the Alliance for Quality Education, physically located in Rochester.
Hi, I'm Jasmine Gripper. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Quality Education based in Albany, New York.
I am Zakiyah Ansari. I'm the Advocacy Director for the Alliance for Quality Education. We are a leading statewide advocacy group in New York, and our project was really around the accountability of the federal dollars, the American Rescue Plan Act, in two particular parts of New York State, which is New York City and Rochester, New York. So the top priorities for AQE, especially in Rochester, it was statewide, but especially in Rochester and New York City, right? So we had strong roots in both those areas as it pertained to accountability. And we wanted to make sure that those were two key areas that we wanted to make sure that our parents and community members and organizers on the ground were really paying attention to how the billions of dollars that both those particular cities received in the federal dollars was spent.
And so we were really fighting hard to make sure, one, the American Rescue Plans actually went to the schools and the students that they were intended for. And we succeeded in that effort in making sure New York State fulfilled its promise of state aid to school, as well as allowing the federal dollars to flow freely to our public schools. And then from there, we knew that parent engagement and parent input was important to the process.
We're an organization that takes direction and leadership from our parents on the ground, and they set the priorities and they set the tone. And so with this funding coming in, prior to this, our fight was trying to obtain funds for our districts, especially in Rochester. We were facing a major deficit crisis. Teachers were getting cut, schools were closing. We were facing a disaster. So a big part of the fight was making sure that we got money for our district so that we could survive.
Organize with parents to create a toolkit that allowed us to create a toolkit for folks to do on the ground advocacy, right? We are a small, mighty group. New York City is huge. Rochester is even bigger than we can totally handle ourselves. So the toolkit was really helpful to be able to have parents and community members actually take it. Who do I talk to about where these dollars are? Go to your school board meeting and ask them, where are these dollars going to? Create opportunities for parents and others to have conversations about what's your top 3 areas where you want to spend these dollars on, right? Bring those suggestions, those ideas, those demands to your school board meeting. Constantly really laying out a plan that parents and community members could use to really hold their local areas accountable, but also their parent leaders and other community members, inform them about actually how much they actually received and how to move forward in making change. The remote under COVID has been we had to be extremely flexible, right? So even as I talked about the toolkit, right? It was very virtual. So your meetings are online, how do you connect to them, right? How do you create a social media toolkit? So being flexible on that front too, of being able to offer people actual things they could do to fight back, to hold folks accountable for these dollars, et cetera. So there's accountability in this one instance. And then when we started to learn about how districts were thinking about using money, specifically in Rochester, right? Again, bringing them up, it was initially folks were in this scarcity mindset, which is we can't do this because they're rightfully so, right? Over the years, districts have told they were going to get money gets taken away from them. But this is a moment you had billions of dollars that had been flushed into the system. And they still had the scarcity mindset of we don't want to hire more educators because we're afraid we'll have to fire them. Or we don't want to do more of this or more of that. And we really, that really motivated us to be we didn't expect that. And we really motivated us to challenge parents and others to challenge that narrative. If students needed more social workers, then that's what we need to do. This money was dedicated to ensure that whatever children needed in this moment right now, not 5 years from now, not 3 years from now, but right now, that's how we should be spending those money. So just being flexible even on the response, because we might have been moving one way around accountability. This is how we think it should be spent. I don't think the Rochester thing really, I think, took us for a loop in regards to they were almost halting moving forward with actually purchasing or evaluating it from a place of we have money, now we can do all the things. I think New York City, it's always about flexibility in New York City, such a huge space and place. But it was really helpful for us to be able to offer the survey connect with parents and community members. Even in New York City, there was a couple of hundred folks. That's not the breadth of it, but it was enough to like really create a report and all the things that we were able to do, and organize folks to have the same types of meetings and conversations with their local community education councils, et cetera, right? So it's always, the flexibility always is around like, how are you able to kind of shift and mobilize? But in organizing, we are taught to be flexible in these moments. And so it wasn't that it was a struggle at all, as opposed to, it was just business as usual.
Investing in those listening sessions, hearing what parents were saying, and then working with them to give them all of the facts so that they could determine what priorities they wanted to set. But I really do feel like we were all on the same page of what we wanted for our schools, what we wanted those investments to be.
I'll also just add that, we've been doing parent and community engagement for a long time. And so the relationships we had in the community long before this project started was really important to build off of. The other part that we're always flexible for is like our parent meetings typically happen in the evening, because that's at a time that works better for our parents. We shifted from a lot of in-person to remote, one partly because of COVID, and also because it really helped parents who really wanted to participate, but commuting to a place was more difficult. In some regions, we did things in person. In some regions, we continued to do things remotely. For our statewide events, it was also really great to tap into technology and Zoom to connect our parents from around the state without folks having to travel. And so literally this week and next, the New York State Senate is holding a hearing on the uses of the funding for schools particularly. AQE will be testifying and sharing the process we went through and what we noticed about the parent engagement or the lack thereof, sharing our findings with the New York State Senate, which I think is really important. We've already been sharing with the state senators of questions to ask of the districts, things that we've been trying to get information on. We are working with the comptroller already, the incoming comptroller in New York City, to figure out how his power can be used to leverage to hold districts even more accountable with some fiscal responsibility. We're planning ahead to how the state can enact new accountability measures, again, in the state budget at the state level, and working literally alongside districts, showing up at school board meetings, meeting with the superintendent, meeting with the chief financial officer, and having regular meetings around what we are noticing, what's missing, and what we still want to see. It's not over. In some places, we're having more success than others, and other times where districts are still being deeply stubborn. We realized plans were really vague. And how do we hold a district accountable to a vague plan? And so going back to districts and asking for details, arming parents with, some questions to help keep things accountable.
New York City, we're still trying to determine exactly where $7 billion actually is. And I don't think it's going to be overnight, but we have a sense, right? We have a sense of what some of those dollars were. So summarizing, that was a big thing. We're trying to figure out and evaluate across the state. Was it a success? How much money was used to do summarizing? Did the children that deserve to get it, or these dollars were dedicated for, actually get those dollars? Like an evaluation, because we don't have to wait. We know that often what happens is these evaluations come years after money has been pushed through a system or a program or a project or whatever. In this moment right now of getting billions of dollars, in this moment of being in COVID, we should not wait. We should be able to evaluate summer learning. Why? Because we have 2 to 3 more years of funding, and we need to make sure that our local districts, our local education, city education departments, are paying attention to these dollars, and that we all are paying attention. Because summer will come up again next year, but there's stuff happening now. So how are we evaluating what we know of some of the things that districts have already spent money on or not spent money on, right? And we're trying to do that statewide. And so it's a constant, not just knowing where the dollars were spent, but holding districts accountable for how they did spend the money, what they didn't do with the money, and how do we shift. It's a living document, and we want to make sure these plans that they put in place are actually supporting children, because our biggest fear is that 3 years down the line, our children won't be successful and there won't be an improvement based on whatever metrics they put out. And they will blame children, Black and brown children, once again, for themselves not being successful. And we will not allow that to happen at AQ. That will not happen on our watch. And so I encourage everyone to be paying attention to these ARPA dollars and don't let anyone tell you they don't know where it's at. We have to make sure districts are accountable for these dollars because they were sent to specific children for a specific reason in a very tumultuous time. And so they have an obligation to fulfill, and we need to make sure they do that. New York City, we're still trying to determine exactly where $7 billion actually is. And I don't think it's going to be overnight, but we have a sense, right? We have a sense of what some of those dollars were. So summarizing, that was a big thing. We're trying to figure out and evaluate across the state. Was it a success? How much money was used to do summarizing? Did the children that deserve to get it or these dollars were dedicated for actually get those dollars? Like an evaluation, because we don't have to wait. We know that often what happens is these evaluations come years after money has been pushed through a system or a program or a project or whatever. In this moment right now of getting billions of dollars, in this moment of being in COVID, we should not wait. We should be able to evaluate summer learning. Why? Because we have 2 to 3 more years of funding, and we need to make sure that our local districts, our local education, city education departments, are paying attention to these dollars, and that we all are paying attention. Because summer will come up again next year, but there's stuff happening now. So how are we evaluating what we know of some of the things that districts have already spent money on or not spent money on, right? And we're trying to do that statewide. And so it's a constant, not just knowing where the dollars were spent, but holding districts accountable for how they did spend the money, what they didn't do with the money, and how do we shift. As you said, it's a living document, and we want to make sure these plans that they put in place are actually supporting children, because our biggest fear is that 3 years down the line, our children won't be successful and there won't be an improvement based on whatever metrics they put out, and they will blame children, Black and brown children, once again for themselves not being successful. And we will not allow that to happen at AQ. That will not happen on our watch. And so I encourage everyone to be paying attention to these ARPA dollars and don't let anyone tell you they don't know where it's at. We have to make sure districts are accountable for these dollars because they were sent to specific children for a specific reason in a very tumultuous time. And so they have an obligation to fulfill, and we need to make sure they do that.
I say take advantage of all of the short talks that Seek Common Ground provided for us at this time. Those were extremely helpful. It was great to connect with other organizations across the state, see how they operate, see what they're experiencing, and getting some pretty valuable tips from all of them. So I would definitely take advantage of that. That was something that I deeply valued throughout this process.
I'm thinking about all the conversations that were set up that allowed us to, all of us as participants and grantees, to be able to hear from experts who have been doing a multitude of work. Like for me, the USDOE sharing very clearly once again that parent and community engagement is a must. That they were reviewing plans and they made districts go back and rewrite them when they didn't see it happening. That affirming once again some of the regulations around, like, this is a living document and people should be able to go back and revisit it. Really powerful. To the folks you had, someone you had on specifically around the regulations themselves, right? And it was a document, I cannot remember his name, that he created. And I actually went back and emailed him and asked him for it because I wanted to share with our leaders across the state to show, yes, see, it does say that you can go back and kind of review these plans. They're not like etched in stone, so don't let anybody tell you that. So again, that was really helpful. Just all the conversations that we were able to have with experts in the field that they were doing stuff, and then allowing us to talk about organizing, right? I don't think they were very powerful and helpful. And then to have the after conversations, right? So you could break down, you could sit there if you only had 30 minutes to actually listen and take in all the information, but then you had 30 minutes of conversation afterwards. You could ask really powerful questions, just dig deeper on it. And that's often very missed when people have webinars. It's like, oh, that was so great. I wish I just had more opportunity to talk. And we literally could talk. It wasn't like put a question in the chat when the extra time happened. It was like, to come off of mute, ask these questions, and to be able to do that, very appreciative of that, because sometimes the questions, especially when I ask questions, sometimes tough questions put in the bottom of a Q&A and they don't often get asked. So to be able to use my voice to ask those questions were really powerful. One moving forward, like I would, who's going to be an SCG grantee and participant, I encourage you to like continue to participate in those, be fully present, like it's important in this moment to be open to receive, not think you know everything, be very humble, right? And have your ears wide open because you will hear some really powerful and amazing things from people who many of us, I know I didn't know most of the folks doing the work and this cohort of folks. It was just really powerful and it's inspiring and hopeful to hear other people doing work on the ground with young people, so many young people, childcare, early child education, pre-K, like all that stuff is just, we are, SCG is bringing the breadth of K to 12 and even more in those spaces. And so super appreciative. So be open to receive and share. This is not something you keep to yourself. Like we need to, if we are about liberating spaces and creating powerful spaces for young people to thrive, then be willing to share, be open to share.